Hi, I'm Anna Kirtlan. I'm a Wellington writer and I've just published my second book, which is a collection of short stories called Ghost Bus, Tales from Wellington's Dark Side. As the title suggests, all the stories are set in Wellington and they're about ghosts and witches and sea monsters. The book has just come out as an ebook, and you can see the cover there, and there should be physical books available really soon. When I wrote Ghost Bus, it was before we went into lockdown, and so the stories in it are stories set in a Wellington that isn't quite the same now, but hopefully one that we're working towards getting back to. And the story I'm going to read to you today is the title story, called Ghost Bus. Also, I apologise for the terrible reflection on my glasses, but I can't read to you without them. So, without further ado, it's no secret that the public transport system in our beloved capital city is stuffed. An upgrade to the bus network, changing routes and introducing hubs, led to chaos, confusion, and people ending up having to catch 3 buses where once they could just catch 1. The old bus fleet was replaced with flash new double-deckers not designed for Wellington's narrow, winding roads. At the same time, the icing on the cake, the contract to run the buses was let to a company that promptly reduced the drivers' pay and conditions. The result? A fleet of double-deckers with nobody at the helm. At the peak of the bus-tastrophe, Wellington Twitter user MurXplat created a handy guide for commuters in the aid of Māori Language Week, which many of us printed out and put up in our offices. They include such gems as Ke whea te pahi, where is the bus? Ka ore he pahi, there is no bus. Koa ki katoa te pahi, the bus is full. Ka te me ea te tahi pahi e, toro e te wā kotahi, 3 buses arrived at once. And, perhaps the most commonly used phrase by Wellington commuters, he pahi ke hua te rahi. That was a ghost bus. The term ghost bus refers to a phenomenon where you see your bus number come up on an electronic board. It goes through the countdown, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, then it disappears from the board and no bus turns up. The next bus then pops up at the bottom of the board and you have another 30 minutes to wait. By the time that bus arrives, there are twice as many people on it because you get the normal run plus all the ghost bus victims. If you're lucky, the ghost bus follow-up will be a double-decker and most of you will fit. More often than not, though, it's a single-deck bus and you end up sitting in each other's laps. I'm one of the lucky few whose bus regularity actually improved with the network changes. My stop became part of the number 1 route, which does a continuous loop from my place through town to the hospital and back. The drawback was, when anything went haywire with the system, buses conking out, not enough drivers, it was also the most likely route to be affected by ghost bus syndrome. So, when I was waiting at the stop outside my work one evening, in the pouring rain, with only scaffolding from a nearby building as a shelter, I was pleasantly surprised to see the number 1 bus turn up right on time. Bracing myself for the usual commuter shuffle to get on board, I was even more surprised to notice I was the only one heading towards the bus. I checked behind me and spotted people I recognised as regulars on my route, just standing there waiting. I had no idea how they could possibly not have seen it, but I waved to catch their attention anyway. They either didn't see me or were deliberately ignoring me. Oh well, their loss, I thought, heading towards the waiting bus. The driver opened the door for me, and I went to step aboard when I was almost bowled over by a frantic-looking man in a rumpled business suit. I try to remember to let people off first before getting on a bus, but sometimes I slip up, particularly on wet days. Still, there was no need for this guy to tackle me with quite that intensity. "Don't get on this bus!" he said in a frantic whisper, giving me a bit of a fright. Figuring he was a few sandwiches short of a picnic, I smiled politely and stepped to one side to let him off, but the driver held up his hand to let me go on first. It's fine, I said. I should have waited. But the driver was insistent, so I tagged on with my snapper card and went to find a seat. The chap in the crumpled clothing looked as though he was about to step off the bus, then froze and turned around, shaking his head and stepping back on dejectedly. Strange, I thought. After all that rush, he must have changed his mind. I stepped into the nearest spare seat and looked out the window. I always enjoyed watching people from the bus, seeing everyone bustling on their way home. I like making up stories for them and giving them names. I was watching one woman with short dark hair wearing a bright red tailored suit and clutching a bunch of flowers. I was just about to come up with a nice story about the origin of the blooms when out of nowhere a guy sat next to me, yammering into his phone. "Dave," he said at the top of his lungs. Yeah, nah, it's fine. I'm just on a bus. No, we need it by close of play tomorrow. I know Terry's holding things up. Each statement was shouted so loudly that everyone on the bus was forced to listen to his business dealings, whether they wanted to or not. I sighed to myself. It was going to be one of those trips then. That was fine. I had my lifeline with me. I pulled my noise-cancelling headphones out of my bag and switched to my good stuff playlist. It was basically anything I heard on Spotify that cheered me up or I thought was funky. Songs from TV or movie soundtracks, David Bowie, Ella Fitzgerald, William Shatner singing Mr. Tambourine Man. I had no idea how I survived public transport before without them. They've genuinely changed my life. I would arrive home with a smile on my face instead of in a homicidal rage. Zoning out loud businessman, I decided to name him Chad, I looked around the bus. It was pretty packed, but that was okay. A whole pile of people would get off at the train station. 3 songs in, with Chad still blathering faintly in the background, something about blue sky thinking, I realised we'd sailed past the train station without stopping. Nobody wanted to get off there. That was a first. As I settled back down, my seat began to jolt forward in repeated thumps. The guy behind me, who reeked of stale cigarettes, was jiggling his knee up and down, repeatedly hitting my seat. I tried to be polite and ignore it, but in the end it got too much. I turned around to ask him to stop, and found myself staring at the most sickly-looking human being I had ever seen. His skin was literally grey, and just a few strands of hair clung to a scaly scalp. He was the word skeletal personified, his cheekbones practically poking through his paper-thin skin. The black bags under his eyes were so deep, it was as if he had no eyes at all. Given he probably wouldn't be long for this world, I decided to give him a break and faced forward again. "Look, I don't care what Simon says. He's not the brain of the operation. I am." Chad was not letting up. In fact, he seemed to be getting louder and more aggressive. "If he thinks for 1 minute..." Normally, I can put up with anything for a half-hour bus ride. But between the cigarette smell, the kicking in my back, and Chad's wheeling and dealing, I was about done. "Excuse me," I said politely, turning to tap my neighbour on the shoulder. He swung round to face me before I had a chance to finish, and I nearly threw up. Half of his face was gone. I could clearly see his tongue flapping behind his teeth through a hole where his cheek should have been, as he continued his conversation with Dave, as though I wasn't even there. Stifling a scream, I looked for the buzzer to stop the bus. Clearly, I was having a psychotic break. It didn't matter that we were nowhere near my stop. I just needed to get off the damn thing. I smashed the red button by the window with my palm. Nothing happened. No friendly bing-bong to announce the stop was coming up. No bus stopping sign lighting up the front. Trust me to end up with a faulty buzzer in the middle of a meltdown. Doing my best not to look Chad in the face, I stood up and reached for the buzzer on his side, expecting to brush past him and preparing my apology. Instead, I lost my footing as my arm went right through him. Chad continued prattling about the state of play and maximising potential as I stumbled through his entire body and out into the aisle. Covering my mouth to stifle a scream, I tripped and landed right next to a cigarette-smoking man who had been sitting behind me. The stale smoke stench made my eyes water. He was still jiggling the seat in front of him, where I'd been sitting before I discovered Chad's disturbing lack of face. To be able to do that, he must be solid, I thought crazily, turning towards him. I was wrong. I could see right into his chest. It was the strangest thing. I could see his clothes, the stained T-shirt underneath the plaid shirt, but beneath that, where his lungs should have been, was a pulsating black mass, dark and angry and growing. A low moan escaped my lips as I launched myself away from him, running up to the front of the bus and screaming at the driver, "Let me off! I need to get off! Stop the bus!" I might as well have been shouting at a post. "He won't stop," a voice behind me said. I turned around to see the man in the crumpled suit, Rumpelstiltskin I'd named him, who had tried to push his way off the bus when I got on. "I tried to warn you," he said helplessly. "You can push that buzzer as much as you like. This bus isn't stopping." I stared blankly, beyond shock, and out into some sort of strange calm. "Let's go upstairs," he said, guiding me gently towards the bus's upper deck. "The driver doesn't seem to mind us walking around, and it's less crowded up there." I numbly followed him up the narrow steps to the top deck. He was right. There were a lot more empty seats up there. As he led us towards the back of the bus, we passed a group of teenage girls doing what teenage girls do best. "Bullshit!" one of them shouted, her high-pitched screech echoing down the aisle. "True," interjected another. "He fucking told me and he wouldn't fucking lie." "Oh my God," the others chimed in. The rest of the conversation was conducted in a pitch usually only audible to canines. A friend once described the collective noun for a group of teenage girls as a squeal. I realised just then how right she was. I understood why Rumpelstiltskin was leading us as far away from them as possible. When we sat down, I finally got a decent look at him. His shirt was untucked, his tie was gone, and his suit jacket looked like it had been slept in. He had the air of someone who had been on a massive bender and hadn't been home for days. I figured I'd take anything he had to say with a grain of salt. I looked down from the window and suddenly realised we were near my stop. Its mundane familiarity sent a wave of relief through me. "I've got to go, this is my stop," I said, standing up and pushing the buzzer again. Rumpelstiltskin shook his head sadly. "I told you, it won't stop." I refused to believe him. When the buzzer didn't buzz, and the stopping light remained dark though, I had a sick feeling he was telling the truth. I watched forlornly as we sailed past my stop. "But we're nearly at the end of the run. What happens then?" I asked. "We start the loop over again," he said. His voice shot through with a tiredness that seemed to come from his very soul. "Okay then," I said, sitting back down heavily. "Tell me what's going on." "Roger," he said, holding out his hand. Failing to stifle a giggle, I shook it. "What?" he asked, surprised to hear laughter. "Sorry," I said, mildly hysterical. I've been calling you Rumpelstiltskin." It was his turn to smile. "That's okay. I've been calling you New Kid on the Block." "Well, nice to meet you, Roger Rumpelstiltskin. I'm Maurice, the New Kid on the Block, and I'd really like to know what the deal is with this bus ride from hell." "Well, you might not be too far from the truth there," Roger said. "I can't give you any answers, really. The driver certainly won't talk to me. What I can tell you for certain, though, is that you and I are the only living people on this bus." "You what?" I said, momentarily becoming as articulate as the girls at the front. "It's a lot to take in, I know, but I've had the time to check it out. Every single passenger on this bus is dead. You could walk up to any of them, wave your hand right through their skull, and they wouldn't even notice you were there." I just stared. "If you look and listen closely, you can hear how they die. The Spice Girls over there, for instance," he pointed to each girl in turn. "Car accident, house fire, alcohol poisoning, took Datura and decided she could fly." I looked over at the girls again. They seemed perfectly fine. Then one turned her head and slightly, and I saw her face fully. She had horrific burns down her left side. What was left of her skin was either charred or red raw, and what I could only assume was the remains of an eyeball dripped from an empty socket. I threw up a little in my mouth. She turned back and continued prattling at her friends as though nothing was amiss. My initial reaction turned to pity. They were all so young. "Oh man, did you see that woman down there in the red jumper? What a fat cow," the girl with the burns said. The rest of the squeal started mooing, and I felt my sympathy evaporate. "Do you think they know?" I asked. "That they're worm food? No, I don't think they do," Roger replied. "The girls over there tell their death stories to each other like they were something interesting that happened at the weekend, something that they walked away from intact. The rest of them are the same. I sometimes feel like this is some sort of bus to the afterlife that got stuck." "Instead of a car on the ferryman, it's Kevin the bus driver?" I asked, holding back the crazy giggles again. "Something like that," he said. "I must say, you're taking this all remarkably well." "Yeah," I said a little sheepishly. "I hardly tell anyone, let alone strangers. But given the situation—" Roger was listening intently. I guessed he hadn't had anyone to talk to for a while. "This isn't exactly the first time I've seen see-through people," I continued. "Not on this scale or this, well, gory. But maybe 1 or 2 a year, usually near a plaque or a statue of some sort. I remembered the first time I saw, let's call it what it was, a ghost. I was on a primary school trip. I can't remember exactly where. I was probably only 5 or 6, but I remember the statue. It was a man on a horse, a soldier probably, and a metal plaque below. I'm fairly certain now that it was a war memorial. There was a woman sitting underneath it. She was dressed funny, wearing an ankle-length dress and the kind of bonnet you saw on old-fashioned dolls, and she was crying. I hated seeing her so sad, so I ran over to see if I could make her feel better. "Don't cry," I said, reaching up to put my hand on her shoulder. I stood up on tiptoes, but when my hand reached what should have been solid flesh, there was nothing there. I fell right through her and smacked my head on the bottom of the statue. I must have stunned myself a little. I certainly had a doozy of a bruise to show for it, because the next thing I remember was the teacher standing over me fussing, angry because I ran away to the statue on my own and concerned because I'd hurt myself. There was no one else there. I asked about the sad lady, but the teacher talked to me the way adults do when they think kids are making things up. No one had seen her. When I got old enough to understand as best I could, I learned that other people couldn't see the see-through people. I also learned that the see-through people couldn't see me. I was never afraid they would hurt me, because they didn't seem to know I was there. However, they also never had half of their faces missing like some of the horrifying occupants on this bus. Roger had gone very quiet while I was telling my story. When I'd finished, he took my hand and looked me directly in the eye. "Me too," he whispered. I looked at him questioningly. "I see them too," he continued. "I always have, and I've never, ever told anyone." I was a mix of emotions. It was the first time I'd spoken to anyone, outside of drunken confessions or dare truth or promise, at slumber parties, who actually believed me, let alone experienced the same thing. It was incredible not to feel so alone, but I also couldn't process the situation it was happening in. My thoughts were interrupted by a loud crunching. I looked across the aisle to see a man shoveling corn chips into his mouth, crunching excruciatingly loudly. Then I realized to my horror that those chips were spraying out of a massive slit in the bottom of his throat and landing in his lap. Utterly oblivious, he kept cramming them in. I shuddered and turned to Roger. "Ghastly, isn't it?" he said. "These things help," gesturing to my noise-cancelling headphones, "until the batteries run out." "But the batteries last for 36 hours, I said. "I know." "How long have you been here?" I asked, afraid to hear the answer. "I honestly can't tell you. My cell phone went flat ages ago, and before you try, you can't make calls from here." Despite the weirdness of it all, I still hadn't really processed the fact I was trapped, and might be for a very long time. I took stock of what I had with me: phone, headphones, water bottle, and a half-eaten sausage from the supermarket. It wasn't exactly a survival kit. As if reading my mind, Roger said, "Time seems to be different here, and we are too. I don't know how long I've been here, but I haven't felt hungry or thirsty. I haven't needed to sleep either. But what about time outside the bus? Surely people will miss us," I worried. "Oh, believe me, I've thought about that an awful lot. I wish I had an answer for you," Roger said sadly. I shook my head. It was all too much to take in. I was distracted from myself by the fact that Captain Crunch's chomping had been joined by a terrible hacking cough, interspersed with big drawn-out sniffs. The sound made every hair on my arm stand on end. A few seats back, a woman coughing and spluttering over the seat in front of her was not even attempting to cover her mouth. That, combined with the crunching, created a hellish chorus that was gradually turning me into raw nerve soup. All I wanted to do was cover my ears and scream, "Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!" Coughing Lady gave a final terrible hack, and a chunk of something fleshy flew out of her mouth and landed with a plop on the seat in front. "Was that her lung?" Roger finished. "She'll keep going like that until she's coughed it all out, and then she'll start again." I shuddered. "That's awful. And she doesn't even realise it's happening." "Or how gross and annoying she is," Roger said, clearly beyond sympathy and utterly over his fellow passengers. "I wonder if they are here until they realise they're dead," I mused. "Wait." A sickly dread washed through me. "Are we dead?" "I shook your hand and you seem pretty solid to me," Roger said. "Good point. And you look like crap, but you don't look like them," I said, trying to hide the fact that I was shaking with relief. "Thanks," Roger said, foam-miffed. "So, we're on sort of a purgatory bus," I puzzled. "Full of the world's worst passengers," Roger grumbled. "Wait, what did you just say?" "That these ghosts really suck?" "Yes," I exclaimed, excited. "And about the coughing woman?" "That she was annoying and gross?" "Yes, and the Spice Girls, and Captain Crunch, and Chad." "Chad?" "The cell phone guy." "Right," Roger said, smiling again. "You've been here for God knows how long. Is there anyone on this bus who isn't an awful passenger?" Roger paused for a moment to think. "Nope." "What if," I said, my voice raising with enthusiasm at my theory, "this is a kind of purgatory for people who were dicks on buses?" Roger looked at me like I was completely insane. "Stay with me," I said. "What if you're right? What if what you say is right? Every person on this bus lacks so much self-awareness that they don't even know they're dead. And everyone I've seen so far has been utterly oblivious of their breaches of bus etiquette. It can't be a coincidence that they're all on a bus. There's got to be a link. Maybe they won't realise they're dead until they realise they're being dicks." "Okay, say I'm buying this," Roger said in a tone that said he definitely was not buying this. "Why are we here?" "Well, I figure because of our particular talents, we are probably among the few people who can actually see this bus," I said. "Fair," Roger replied, "but explain to me why we can't get off." I hadn't thought that far. I dumped my lunch bag on the seat next to me and slumped down in defeat. "It's okay," Roger said sympathetically. "I've nearly lost my mind trying to work out what's going on." Out of conditioned politeness, I scooped my lunch bag off the seat next to me and put it at my feet in case someone else boarding might want the seat. "Wait a minute!" I shouted, then lowering my voice to a more acceptable volume. "What if this is some sort of warning?" Roger just stared. "Have you ever been a dick on a bus?" "I don't think so." "Think harder. Have you ever dumped a bag on a seat or spread yourself across two so no one could sit next to you? Have you given someone with a screaming baby the stink face when it absolutely hasn't been their fault? Have you gone to work with a cold and shared your germs with the city? Oh, maybe we're here now so we don't end up here later. Roger sat down himself. Okay, Miss Marple, let's say you've cracked this. How do you propose to use this revelation of yours to get off this thing? I was one step ahead of him. From now on, I said, sitting up straight and making sure I wasn't elbowing anyone invisible, we will be model passengers. We will talk in an acceptable volume, cover our mouths when we cough, not hog the seats, and maybe he'll let us off next time he stops. Small flaw in your plan, Roger said. He only seems to stop for people who can actually see the bus. None of these guys, he gestured to our fellow passengers, have pushed a buzzer since I've been on here. And when I tried to get off after you came on board, it was as though I hit a wall of air. Also, I don't think I've been that poorly behaved, he's finished defensively. You might not have been, but trying to bulldoze through me yelling "Don't get on the bus" while coming from a well-meaning place could be considered a bit of a dick move. Roger looked sheepish. Sorry about that. I was only trying to help you and me. But you have a point. So our plan is to wait until someone else who sees ghosts boards this bus and walk off, politely, I finished firmly. That could take forever. Do you have anything better to do? I honestly can't tell you how long Roger and I waited. As he said, time works differently on board. My only point of reference, my cell phone, disappeared when its battery ran out. I tried to count the circuits we travelled, but the amount of times we sailed past the hospital, through Island Bay, and painfully past my stop, all blurred into one. I would stroke the bright red stop button in its friendly yellow case mournfully, running my finger over the braille for stop underneath the word. I wondered how much braille I could teach myself with just those 4 letters. It was as Roger said. I never felt hungry or the need to sleep, but I felt an incredible longing for a place just a block down the road from a stop we passed several times a day. Roger and I talked, politely and at a respectable volume, about his time on the bus, about his attempts to communicate with the other passengers once he realised it wasn't stopping, about the moment he clicked to the fact that he was the only one on board with a pulse, about shouting and pleading with the driver. And you say you haven't been a badly behaved passenger? Yeah, I forgot about that. We talked about attempting 111 calls, trying the break glass in case of emergency tool, it didn't break the glass, and seeing if he could squeeze out the windows. He was really only going along with my plan because he'd tried everything else. I was fine with that. It might have been a crap plan, but it was the only one we had. We talked about our various ghostly experiences. I could feel his relief at having someone share this part of his life with. Other times we just sat in companionable silence, running over life, the universe, and everything in our heads. It was during one of those silences that he gripped my shoulder. "Maurice," he whispered urgently. "The bus is slowing." Pulling myself out of my thoughts, I looked out the window. He was right. We were coming up Willis Street and heading towards the bus stop just past the Spark building, the stop I boarded this hell bus from in the first place. The stopping sign was flashing glorious red letters. My heart was racing. "Okay, stay calm," I said, talking to both of us really. "Grab your snapper card, but don't get out of your seat until the bus stops." "Okay," he said, visibly shaking. "Do we exit at the front or the back?" "Definitely the front, so we can thank the driver. You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "Well, I've certainly had time." As we pulled up to the stop, I saw a woman heading towards us, clutching a laptop bag and looking over her shoulder at the other people waiting, wondering, I suspected, as I had, why they weren't walking towards the bus. "What about her?" Roger asked. "We have to warn her." "I'll take care of that. You go first, tag off, thank the driver, and leave me to do the rest." I squeezed his hand. "It's okay. You've got this." The bus stopped. "Go," I said. "Be calm and polite and just walk off the bus." He looked at me, eyes full of fear. "If this doesn't work, I don't know what I'll do." "Don't think about that now. Just go while we have the chance." Shakily, Roger got up out of his seat. We walked 2 meters that felt like 2 miles to the opening door. Roger tagged off. "Please check your balance," a friendly electronic voice advised. Thank you, driver," he said, stepping down the stairs and onto the blessed pavement. My heart surged as I did the same. "Thank you, driver," I chirped in my friendliest voice. As I took the last step to freedom, I put myself between the woman with the laptop and the bus. Looking her directly in the eye, I said, "You might want to get the next one. This one's really crowded and full of the worst people." The woman looked at me as though I was bonkers. I didn't blame her, but it would have been even worse if I'd opened with ghosts. "Thanks for your concern, but I'll take the risk," she said hurriedly. I tried again. "If you're in a rush, this bus will take longer than you think." "Please, just let me on," she replied in exasperation. In one last desperate attempt, I stepped up close to her and whispered hurriedly, "Look, I know you can see ghosts. That's the reason you can see the bus and no one else can. I can too, and I'm telling you right now, the bus is full of deeply unpleasant dead people, and if you get on, you won't be getting off for a very long time." For a split second, the woman's eyes widened in recognition before she angrily dismissed me. "I'm late and you're insane. Get out of my way or I'll get the police involved," she spat, looking fearfully at the bus as if worried it would pull away. Through the bus windscreen, I could see the driver giving me a warning look. I stepped aside and the woman pushed past huffily. "Just be polite," I called desperately after her. She rolled her eyes and stepped aboard. "She knew," I said to Roger, who was waiting for me on the pavement. When I mentioned ghosts, I could see in her eyes she knew what I was talking about. "She was in denial," Roger said sadly. "I know what that's like. I was the same for a very long time." "She won't be for long," I said gloomily, watching the bus disappear into the distance. "Don't look so defeated," Roger said. "You saved us." I watched the bus pull away. "I think I might catch the train from now on," I said, reaching for my purse to see if I still had a pass. I realised to my dismay that, while I had my handbag, I'd left my lunch bag sitting under the seat. A water bottle and a half-eaten sausage were now doing the infinite circuit. I really hope it won't count against me, but I guess there's only one way I'm going to find that out. The end. And if you're interested in any more stories like this, you can visit my Facebook page, which is Anna Kirtlan Writes, or my website, which is cmunchkin.com. Thanks very much.